Today's daf is daf Ayin Zayin. We're going to start with the Mishnah on the bottom of daf Ayin Vav. And the central theme of today's daf is going to be the Lachmei Toda. And the Mishnah says, HaToda Haisabach Hamesh Se'in Yerushalmios, Shehen Sheish Midbarios. So we're talking about the volume of flour that was needed to make the lechamim. We'll soon see that there are 40 lechamim, 10 of which are chametz, and 30 of which are matzah. How much of a volume of flour do we need? And we have to know about two different measuring standards. One is midbarios, which is the way they did it when the Torah was given back in the midbar. And then in a later period of time, we have what's called Se'in Yerushalmios, and the ratio between the two is 5/6. So that means that they expanded the measurement after they came into Eretz Yisrael, which is called the Mida Yerushalmis, and they expanded it so that which was 6 se'in in the midbar is now only 5 se'in, because 5 se'in is larger, and therefore it's equal to 6 se'in, and that's equal to shtei ephos. Ha'epha shalosh se'in. So the epha is equal to 3 se'in, and therefore if you require 2 ephos, then we multiply 3 by 2, and we get 6. So we're left with Sheish Se'in Midbarios, based on the biblical requirements as mentioned in the Torah. So the total amount of flour that the Torah requires for the Arboim Lechamim of Lachmei Toda is 2 ephos, which we said is the equivalent of Sheish Se'in, which is also the equivalent of 20 isaron. And this will be derived in the Gemara later on Daf Ayin Zayin Amud Beis. So again, an ephah equals 3 se'in. The toda therefore contained a total of 6 se'in of flour, and this refers to the se'in at the time that the Torah was given our Sinai in the Midbar. And these are called midos midbarios. When the land of Israel was settled, then they expanded all the measurements by 1/6, which is actually 1/5 of the original amount, or 20%. Now, this has to do with something called milabar, which means externally, that the added amount of 1/6 is external. For example, if you added to 5, 1/5 of the original, that's going to be equal to 1/6 of the total amount. So each original saw was really only 5/6 of the midos of Se'in Yerushalmios, the new saw. So the Torah requires 6 Se'in midvarios, but already at the time of the Mishnah, they were using only 5 Se'in Yerushalmios because they had expanded the measurement of the se'in by 1/6. And all that is equal to esronim, to esrim isaron. An isaron, which literally translates as 1/10, is 1/10 of an ephah. So if we're talking about the 5 se'in of Yerushalmios, and we're calculating that an isaron is 1/10 of an ephah, me just get this straight. 1/10 of an ephah. And we said that there are shtei ephos. So that's going to give me shtei ephos times shtei ephos. Just 1 second. Let me see if I get this right. Right, we said a isaron is 1/10 of an ephah. So if you multiply 1/10 of an ephah times 20, then you get shtei ephos. And that's called esrim isaron. Now, how do we divide up the esrim isaron? So the Mishnah says, asara lechametz, half of the esrim isaron of that volume of flour will be dedicated for the 10 of the 40 lachmei toda that are made chametz, and then you're left with another 10 for the matzah. And therefore, here we start on Daf Ayin Zayin, the Mishnah establishes asara lechametz, isara lechala. So since you have 10 lechamim that are chametz, and you've dedicated 10 isronim for the 10 lechamim, that's mean one isaron for every one of the lechem. However, in the case of the matzah, where once again you only have 10 isaron because we only give half to the matzah, and now there are 30 matzos. So b'matzah shalosh minim, right? There are 3 categories. The Torah says explicitly that there are 3 categories, each one of 10, of matzah, and they are called chalos, number 1, rekikin, number 2, revucha, number 3. And all these chalos are made by mixing oil in the dough before it was baked, with the exception of rekikin. Rekikin, you don't mix the oil into the dough, but rather you smear the oil on top. And this we learned back on Daf Ayin Hey. So the revucha are the loaves that were first scalded in water and then baked in an oven and finally fried in oil. Okay. So now the Mishnah says, Nimtzu, it comes out that Shlosha Esronim Ushlish Lechol Min V'Min. So we're now dividing it by 3. And once you divide it by 3, you end up with Shalosh Chalos Lisaron. Now, we're actually missing a third of each of the 10, but that has to do with Truma, which is going to be a sugya that we'll learn, that's dedicated to the Kohen. So therefore, we're only left with Shalosh Chalos Lisaron. So you have 10 isaron of flour dedicated for the matzah. They're divided equally amongst the 3 types of matzahs, chalos, rekikin, and revuchin. Each type was made up of 3 1/3 isarons, but the extra third is going to be dedicated to the Kohen, and you multiply that by 3 and you have 1 isaron. So you're left with shalosh chalos lisaron. Now, all this is based on the isaron. In Yerushalayim, they didn't use the isaron, but Memida Yushalmis, Hayushloshim Kav. They used a different measurement called a Kav. And 5 se'in, which was the amount of flour that we mentioned with Mida Yushalmis, is equal to 30 Kav. So he points out that a saw contains is equal to 6 kabim. And now we end up with 30 kav. Let me get that one more time. A sa equals 6 kavim. So therefore we multiply 5, because we needed 5 se'in Yerushalmios. Multiply that by 6 is 5 times 6 is 30. Did I get that right? Is 30 kav. That's what the Mishnah says. Now, you have to divide up the kavim into two. Chamisha sar lechametz, chamisha sar lematzah. Chamisha sar lechametz, kav umechza lechala. Right, so you are left with 15 kavim for the 10 lachmei chametz of the Todah. So 15 and 10 will give you a kavu mechza, 1.5 kav. Now you have the other half, which is chamisha sar kavim, and that's lamatzah, and that's going to be divided up into 3 categories of chalos, rikikin, or revuchin. That's called shlosha minim. Is then nimtzu chameshes kavim lechol min v'min. So you have 15 kavim, which is half of the original 30 kavim, and those 15 kavim are dedicated to the matzos, chalos matzos, which are divided into 3 categories. So if you have 15 kavim divided into 3, you have 5 kavim for each one of the categories. Ushtei chalos lekav. So if you have 5 kavim, right? If you have 5 kavim, then you have shtei chalos lekav. 1 second. Okay, now we start the Gemara. Hatoda haisaba chamesh se'in Yerushalmios, and that's the equivalent of sheish se'in midbarios, which is the equivalent of shtei ephos. Each epha is 3 se'in. That's in terms of midbarios. Minani mili, what's the pasuk? Omer of Chizda, the Omakra, ha'efa v'abas tochen echad. Something called a bas, which is again a measurement of volume, and the efa and the bas, says Yechezkel Hanavi, have the same exact volume. Ma bas, apparently we know, and the Gemara is going to ask how we know this, that a bas is sholosh se'in, is therefore af efa sholosh se'in. Ubas gufa minol, and how do we know that the bas equals 3 se'in? If you'll suggest, because it says, again, this is a pasuk, I believe in Yechezkel. Let me see. Yeah. Laseis ma'asar hachomer habas. A bus shall be taken as 1/10 of a liquid called chomer. So we know that the chomer contains 30 sa, and the bas is 10% of 30 sa, 1/10, which means it's 3 sa. So the Gemara rejects this. Efa nami haksiv asiris hachomer ha'efa. Right? And we said that the efa, that's what the Mishnah established, is sholosh se'in. And now we should come to the conclusion that if a chomer is 30 saw, so not only is a bas 3 se'in, but an ephah is 3 se'in. And that's what we saw in the Mishnah, correct? A ephah shalosh se'in. So the question is, why do you compare the ephah to the bas? The pasuk itself compares the ephah to asiris hachomer. And the chomer is 30 saw. So therefore, asiris hachomer is 3 saw. So what do I need this bas? Why did Navi say ha'ephah v'bas tochen, that they're equal, echadi? Ela chomer lo yadana kam. The premise that we knew that chomer equals 30 saw is incorrect. And therefore you cannot equate and derive the measurement of the ephah from chomer because we don't know how much is the chomer. Is hachanami lo yadanu kama. But then we're stuck because if we don't know what the chomer is, and the Navi tells us that bas equals chomer, well, that's not going to tell us a thing. We don't know the size of the chomer. How would we know the volume of a bas? Elmi hocha. Therefore, we have to introduce a different pasuk. Let's read the whole pasuk. It says, "Ha'ephah v'abas tochen echad yeh laseis masar hachomer abas v'asiris hachomer ha'ephah el hachomer yeh maskunto." So the chomer is used to measure both solids and liquids. In a smaller volume, the ephah is measured dry, the bas liquid. And the pasuk teaches us that each has to be 1/10 of a chomer. And 1/10 is enough to be mafresh maser, which is 1/10. Ela mihacha, the pasuk says, "V'chok hashemen, habas hashemen, masar habas min hakor, aseres habatim chomer ki aseres habatim chomer." So this pasuk says explicitly that a bas is 1/10 of a car. A car we know contains 30 saw. So a bas, therefore, 1/10 of 30 saw contains 3 saw. And we said that an ephah equals a bas. So therefore we derive the conclusion that an ephah contains 3 saw. And if you multiply that by 2, because we need shtei ephos, so we end up with 6 saw. Okay, now we have a little bit of a digression here with a memra of Shmuel. This is a separate discussion. There was a takana that was made that ein mosifin al midos yosem ishtus. If we increase the sizes of a measure, the maximum of an increase could be 1/6, which we said that the Mida Midbarios, the Mida Yushalmis expands the Mida Midbarios by 1/6. And that's the ceiling. Now Shmuel applies the same reasoning not only to measurements of kemach and so forth, but also to matbeos, to coins. V'lo matbea yoser mishtus. If we increase the weight of a matbea, we are the ceiling, the top is 1/6. Mistaker lo yistaker yoser mishtus. Right, so there are those who buy and sell, and they put in a lot of work to buy and sell. Then their profit is going to maximize at 1/6. So a retail merchant who buys from wholesalers and sells to individual customers is entitled to a markup of maximum 1/6. This is takonas chachamim, and it applies to staples, things that are necessary, basic necessities. This is sugim b'mitzia. My timer. Why is it that the ceiling for increasing the size of measurements is only up to and not beyond the sixth? If we're concerned about the possibility that if you increase the size of a measure, then we force the merchants to raise the price. Now, this itself is not such a problem because it's really just a reflection of the greater value of a larger measure. But it could lead to inflation because visiting merchants might not be aware that the measures were enlarged in this particular community. They might think that the higher prices stem from a shortage in food supply, and as a result, they might raise their prices needlessly to set off a spiraling trend, an inflation. The Gemara rejects this. Ihachishtus namilo. You're allowing us to expand the measurements by 1/6. Well, 1/6 is also going to cause that same spiral effect of inflation. Ela mishum ona, but maybe because of ona. Ona works in two ways. Either you overcharge or you're underpaid. And if we expand the measurement by more than 1/6, that's going to cause ona. More than a shtus of either over or undercharging is bittul mekach. The entire deal is off. The sale is void. And Chachamim didn't want to make a situation in which many sales would be voided. That also is rejected. Va'amar Rava kol davar shebemida v'shebemishkal v'shebeminyan afilu pachas michteo no choser. If you're worried about bittul mekach, then in cases where something is sold by measure, by weight, or by number, then it doesn't matter how much you were overcharged or underpaid, it's always going to be choser. If the wrong amount of an item is delivered, the defrauded party does not waive his claim for a refund. So if the discrepancy was more than 1/6 of the total, it is returnable and the sale stands. Okay, this is real heavy, Nezikin and Mekach Memkar. And there are many different shitos here in the Rishonim. But let's just say the following. If a merchant is unaware that the size of the measure has changed, that's what we were worried about, that new merchants coming in from outside the community are not aware that they expanded the measurement, he unknowingly delivers a larger measure of produce than he intended to. I mean, he wanted to give it on the old, smaller measure, and he now has to deliver the larger measure. The sale will stand even if the measure was increased by more than 1/6. So therefore, the 1/6 limit on an increase in measures cannot be based on a concern for the voiding of sales. Ela mishum tigra. We're going to have to explain Shmuel's maximum of 1/6 is based on merchants. And what does that mean? Ki hechi de lo limte Zoina. So we're going to cap it off at 1/6. So the merchant who Shmuel says is allowed to profit by 1/6 should not suffer a loss of his principal if he mistakenly delivers a new measure of produce for the price of the old measure. So again, it turns out that he gets no profit whatsoever, but at least what Shmuel accomplishes with this takana is that he won't lose anything. So the Gemara doesn't like it. The Gemara says, Zaina hu limti, you're only concerned that he shouldn't suffer a loss. Rav chalo boy, don't you have to worry about his making a profit? Zevin v'zabin tagra ikri, would you call someone who sells for the same price that he buys a merchant? He's not a merchant, and he put in so much work and toil. So therefore, the rule of Shmuel could not have been enacted to protect merchants. Elam or Rav Chizda, Shmuel kra ashkach v'darsh. Shmuel found a pasuk, and based on the pasuk, he derived the conclusion that you're only permitted to add measures or coins, the weight of coins, up to but not beyond the sixth. And what pasuk did he find? And this is a pasuk again in Yechezkel. It says, "Shekel esrim gera, esrim shkolim chamisha v'esrim shkolim asor v'chamisha shekel amona yilachem, mana masan v'arboin hava." A mana consists, the Gemara asks, of 240 dinar, which is the equivalent of 60 shkolim. It's an established fact that a mana consists of 100 dinar, which equals only 25 shkolim. El shmamina tlas, we have to derive three halachas from this pasuk. Shmamina mana shel kodesh kafel hoya. The value of a sanctuary mana was double that of the common mana. The base value of the sanctuary mana, which is the mana referred to in this pasuk, was 200 dinrim, otherwise 50 shkolim, double that of the common mana, which we said was 25 shkolim. So if someone took a neder to donate a mana to the Bedek Habayis, he's obligated to give a mana of the sanctuary. And the remaining discrepancy of 40 dinrim is accounted for by the fact that in the period in which the pasuk was written, the weight of the mana had been increased. Shmamina mosifin al midos vein mosifin yosem ishtus, ushmamina shtusa milabar. The cheshbon of a shtus is milabar, is externally. It's a sixth of the new larger measure, not of the original measure. Omer Avina, Maslisa Nami Deka. I would support Shmuel's ruling from our Mishnah. To Katani Toda Hoisa Ba Chamesh Sein Yushalma Shehem Sheish Midbarios. Shmamina. We see that the cheshbon is made milabar, shtusa milabar, and it's reckoned externally. Yushalmi Sa is 6/5 of the midbarios, of the Sa midbarios, means that the measure was increased by a sixth, reckoned externally.